The night sky over Thebes was unusually dark, the stars hidden behind thick clouds. Inside the grand palace, the tension was palpable. Isidora, now fully aware of the power she carried, stood before Pharaoh Neferu. The air was heavy with unspoken fears. The Shet-u, those shadowy demons of the Duat, had grown bolder, and their attacks were becoming more frequent. Pharaoh Neferu's gaze hardened as he addressed his council. The war has begun. The Shet-u rise with every passing hour, and the barrier between our world and the Duat grows weaker. The high priestess nodded gravely. We must find the remaining sons and daughters of the sun. Without them, we cannot hope to close the rift. Isidora stood at the pharaoh's side, her thoughts racing. She had been chosen, but she still felt unprepared for the enormity of the task before her. The fire of Sekhmet roared within her, but controlling it was a constant struggle. She could feel the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders, a burden that threatened to crush her. But she had no time for doubt. The Shet-u were on the move, and the war was coming. Meanwhile, deep within the shadowy halls of the palace, Nakht moved through the corridors like a serpent. His dark eyes gleamed with ambition, and a sinister smile played across his lips. He had made his pact with the Lord of Shadows, and now he had all the power he needed to bring Egypt to its knees. In secret, Nakht gathered his followers, men and women who believed that the pharaoh's reliance on the ancient warriors was foolish and that Egypt's future lay in aligning with the forces of darkness. They whispered of power beyond imagination, a power that would make them gods among men. But Nakht knew that power came with a price. The Lord of Shadows had promised him dominion over Egypt, but Nakht was no fool. He knew the Shet-u would consume the world if they were left unchecked. His goal was not to serve them, but to control them. And for that, he needed to break the barrier between the worlds. Isidora, Khepri, and a small group of warriors journeyed once more into the desert, this time in search of the blade of Anubis, a legendary weapon said to hold the power to sever the ties between the Shet-u and the mortal world. The blade, forged by the gods themselves, had been lost for centuries, hidden deep within the temple of Anubis in the Valley of the Kings. The journey was perilous. As they trekked through the scorching sands, the Shet-u hunted them relentlessly, attacking under cover of night. Each encounter grew more dangerous, and Isidora found herself relying more and more on the fire within her to protect her comrades. But the power of Sekhmet was unpredictable. During one battle, Isidora unleashed a torrent of flame that not only consumed the Shet-u, but also scorched the very earth beneath them, leaving her comrades in awe and fear. She was beginning to understand why her ancestors had feared this power. It was both a gift and a curse. After days of grueling travel, they arrived at the Temple of Anubis, its massive stone facade looming before them like a giant sentinel. The air around the temple was unnaturally still, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. The Shet-u were close. Inside, the temple was a maze of dark passages and ancient traps. The walls were covered in hieroglyphs depicting Anubis, the god of death, leading souls to the afterlife. Isidora felt a shiver run down her spine as they ventured deeper into the temple. At the heart of the temple, they found it, the blade of Anubis, resting on an altar carved from black stone. The blade was sleek and black, glowing faintly with a light that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the earth itself. But as Isidora reached for the blade, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Nakht, his eyes glowing with dark power. "You think you can stop what's coming?" He sneered. "You are nothing compared to the Lord of Shadows." Before anyone could react, Nakht raised his hand, and a wave of dark energy surged toward them. The room erupted in chaos as Nakht and his followers attacked. Khepri leaped into action, his staff blazing with fire, while Isidora fought to keep the flames under control. But Nakht's power, granted by the Lord of Shadows, was formidable. His dark magic clashed with Isidora's fire, filling the temple with blinding light and shadow. The battle raged on, each side pushing the other to the brink. Khepri fought valiantly, his control over the element of fire unmatched, but Nakht was relentless. His mastery over the shadows seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. Isidora knew she had to reach the blade of Anubis, but every time she got close, Nakht sent another wave of dark energy her way. She was tiring, her powers draining with each strike. But then, in a moment of clarity, she remembered Khepri's words. "Do not fear the fire, let it consume you." With a roar of determination, Isidora allowed the fire to fully take hold. Flames erupted from her hands, hotter and more intense than ever before. The ground beneath her feet cracked as the temple itself seemed to tremble under the force of her power. Nacht staggered back, momentarily stunned by the intensity of her attack. And in that brief moment, Isidora seized the blade of Anubis. As Isidora gripped the blade of Anubis, a surge of energy shot through her body. The blade hummed with power, and she could feel its connection to the gods. This was no ordinary weapon. It was a conduit of divine energy, and with it, she could sever the Shet-u from the mortal world. But the blade also came with a price. To use it meant to sacrifice something of herself, to give up a piece of her soul. Isidora felt the weight of that choice as she turned to face Nacht once more. The dark sorcerer sneered at her, his hands glowing with shadowy energy. "You think a mere blade can stop me? The Lord of Shadows is eternal." Isidora raised the blade, its edge gleaming in the dim light of the temple. "This is not about you, Nacht. It's about saving Egypt from the darkness you've unleashed." With a swift, decisive movement, she struck at Nacht. The blade cut through the air, and with it, a wave of divine energy surged forth, severing Nacht's connection to the Lord of Shadows. Nacht screamed as the dark energy was ripped from him, his body crumpling to the ground. The temple trembled as the forces of darkness were momentarily driven back. Though Nacht was defeated, the battle was far from over. As Isidora and her companions made their way back to Thebes, they realized that the Shet-u were still growing in power. The Lord of Shadows had been weakened but not destroyed, and the barrier between worlds continued to falter. In the days that followed, Egypt was plunged into chaos. The Shet-u attacked in greater numbers, their shadowy forms rising from the ground like living nightmares. Villages were consumed, entire cities swallowed by the darkness. Isidora knew that the final battle was approaching. She could feel the Lord of Shadows gathering his strength, preparing for one last assault on the mortal world. And though they had the blade of Anubis, it would not be enough to stop him. They needed the remaining sons and daughters of the sun, the only ones who could channel the full power of the gods. Back in Thebes, Isidora stood before the great temple of Ammon-Ra, the largest and most sacred temple in all of Egypt. She knelt before the altar, her heart heavy with the weight of her mission. She prayed to the gods, asking for their guidance, their strength. The fire of Sekhmet burned within her, but it was not enough. She needed the others, warriors of water, air, and earth. Together, they could form the complete circle of divine power. As she prayed, the air around her seemed to hum with energy. The gods were listening. Suddenly, a vision filled her mind. She saw the faces of the remaining warriors, scattered across the land. Each one was unaware of their destiny, but their powers were already awakening. Isidora rose to her feet, her heart filled with determination. The gods had answered her call. Now, she had to find the others before it was too late. Isidora and Khepri set out once more, this time with a new sense of urgency. The Shet-u were growing stronger with each passing day, and the Lord of Shadows was preparing to break through the barrier between worlds. Their journey took them to the far reaches of Egypt, into the mountains, the Nile Delta, and the heart of the desert. Along the way, they found the remaining sons and daughters of the sun, each one unique, each one holding a piece of the god's power. There was Neith, the warrior of water, whose strength was as fluid and unstoppable as the Nile. There was Tefnut, the master of air, whose winds could shape the desert itself. And there was Geb, the warrior of earth, whose connection to the land was unmatched. Together, they formed the circle of divine warriors, the last hope against the Shet-u. With the warriors gathered, Isidora returned to Thebes, where Pharaoh Neferu awaited. The city was under siege, the Shet-u pouring through cracks in the barrier, their numbers seemingly endless. But now, with the power of the gods united, Isidora knew they had a chance. The final battle began at dawn. The warriors of light clashed with the demons of darkness, their powers blazing across the sky. Isidora wielded the blade of Anubis, its divine energy cutting through the Shet-u like a beacon of hope. But even as they fought, the Lord of Shadows loomed on the horizon, a massive, terrifying force of darkness. He was the embodiment of the Duat itself, and his power threatened to consume everything. Isidora knew that the battle would not be won through strength alone. It would take sacrifice, courage, and faith in the gods. As the war raged on, Isidora realized that the true victory would come not from defeating the Lord of Shadows, but from restoring the balance between the worlds. The barrier had been weakened, but it could be restored, if they were willing to pay the ultimate price. And so, with the fate of Egypt hanging in the balance, Isidora and her companions prepared for the final confrontation. To discover the thrilling conclusion and learn what sacrifices must be made to restore balance, don't miss part 3.